Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir. As you know, Philippe May will talk about the genius of Orson Welles today. And we are happy to see you all here. And I give him the floor. Okay, merci.
Yeah, okay, hi. Thank you for coming. So, some time ago, we had discussions about movies, and there was this character of Orson Welles who was coming back, and Alexander suggested a movie by him that we never saw. It was Falstaff, that we will see that a bit, and it was again a rediscovery of Orson Welles. So it felt like actually it was a good take to dig a little bit into this character of Orson Welles. He's a pretty complex. That's a pretty complex topic. Like, he had a very rich life. So I think it's worth rediscovering what we can call the genius of Orson Welles, and why was he a genius or not. So I really try my best to not to bother you too much with a lot of talk. So I prepared a lot of small clips of his movies and interviews, and so on and so forth. So filmography. Orson Welles was born in 1915. We'll go through that, but you can have a quick look at his complete filmography. There are only 13 movies in there. There are a lot of unfinished projects, unfinished work, a lot of theater plays, documentaries, TV shows. He was extremely active all his life. He was a very hard worker. We'll see that. Quite a complete artist too. I have put small clips of each of them to show a little bit. Among his unfinished work that I might not mention, for example, there was Don Quixote. So 20 years before Terry Gilliam also tried and faced himself a lot of issues. There was some movie called The Deep, which was almost finished and never got finished, but was remade, and it came as a pretty recent movie, I think, with, of course, some other actors, or The Merchant of Venice, which is based also on Shakespeare, and so on and so forth. There are dozens of projects, actually, unfinished documentaries, and so on and so forth. So that's the young Orson Welles. He was from United States of America. You can see that. And from his beginning of his life, he was tagged as a very a genius, even when he was 3 years old. So his mother was a pianist. His father was some kind of inventor. He invented some system for light on bicycles, and he made some money for that. But Orson Welles lost both his parents very young. His mother, he was 6. His parents separated very early. And then he lost his father when he was 15. So pretty much orphan, almost orphan, actually. He was around 10 years old. You can really see his face, like the traits of his face there.
I painted it, they said, nobody's ever seen such painting. I played, nobody's ever played like that. And it just seemed to me no limit to what I could do. I was spoiled in a very strange way as a child, because everybody told me from the moment I was able to hear that I was absolutely marvelous. I never heard a discouraging word for years, you see. I didn't know what was ahead of me.
So he started when he was young. He started to study music with his mother, and then the violin, the piano. And then with his father was, they moved a lot. So they moved to the Middle East, the Far East, to Europe, all that during his early teenagers days, to China even. And when his father died at 15, Orson Welles wanted to pick up a career of a painter. So he went to Ireland. This is a picture from Ireland. So he was around 16 years old. And in order to make a living from painting, he realized pretty quickly that it wouldn't work. It would be very difficult. So he headed to theater, stage plays. He found some troupe there in Dublin, and he told them some arranging truth that he was himself a well-known actor in Broadway, which was completely false, but that helped him start his career with his troupe in Ireland. He was really remarked there. He worked on his voice, like you can. That's why also I put so many clips from him, because he has he had such a charisma on screen, and his voice dictation was near perfect, I believe. So much control he had, and he developed all that really early so in Ireland. And at the age of 19 or 20, he went back to US. To Broadway this time for good, and he could show that he had experience really with the theater. And in Broadway, not only he became an actor, but he also started his own troupe called the Mercury Theatre. Before we go there, I just put some pictures of his paintings all along his life. So it's a mix. There are some Don Quixote things, some personal things, some auto-portrait. This is again, this is Falstaff, I believe, or King Lear. Don Quixote, the Spain, and auto-portraits. This is from the trial slideshow. This is probably Falstaff again. This might be Othello. And he drew his own Christmas cards also to friends and all. Yeah, he had, as we'll discover, he was a very versatile artist, actually. So starting with a career, he developed really a passion for theater. And when around 1936, so he was hardly 21 years old, he started putting pretty ambitious theater project, starting with what is called, remembered, as a voodoo Macbeth. So he was a big fan of Shakespeare. He adapted many, all along his career, a lot of plays by Shakespeare, both on theater and on cinema. And this one was on Broadway and made quite an impression. There's a clip from a documentary about it.
Ring the alarm bell! Low, in! Come, Rack! These people had never done Shakespeare before, but with Orson back of them, Orson could take them and change them into whatever he wanted.
Orson's artistic ambition.
He felt that if he could do this with a group of black actors who were not versed in Shakespeare, what could he not do?
Play on, Macduff. Let there be he who first cries, hold enough.
You can see just how this whole thing was choreographed. Every step is meticulously done. It looks like chaos, but it was very, very carefully contrived chaos.
And be these juggling fiends no more believed.
The way he developed in those performers a sense of the performer's dignity and respect for himself. Orson somehow got those people to play those roles as though they'd been preparing for them all their lives.
I think it's a great success in my life. Everybody who was anybody in the black or white world was there. And when the play ended, there were so many curtain calls that finally they left this curtain open and the audience came up on the stage to congratulate the actors. That was magical.
Yeah, so I think that's a constant with him, like the one part of the humanistic, the deep human values he cherishes, and we'll talk along with that. But there's a very common statement that is associated to him, is that the genius, but a difficult genius, and we'll see why this label came to him. And from all what I read about him, it was kind of the opposite, actually. He was, of course, an extremely demanding as an artist, as a creator, but I think he really valued human relations above all. And for directing theater and cinema, that's a very important part to gain trust and being able to work and put the people you work with in the best situation. Hi. So after Macbeth, like he continued, there's a lot of plays. I absolutely don't have the record of all what he did. But another serious one, the Macbeth did indeed, like it was a time during the 30s where segregation in the US was still very present, so it was almost a political act to hire a troupe of entirely black people. Negroes, no, they said Negroes at that time, black, whoever, like, how do you say now these days? Afro-Americans, yes, Afro, that's the politically correct term these days. Another project that he had was an adaptation, oh gosh, I forgot. Julius Caesar, another play by Shakespeare, and it was in 1936, and he put it on the scene as extremely obviously criticism against what was happening in Germany at that time, and in 1936 in the US, this was a strong statement because the intelligentsia, the American public was not really aware of what was happening, and there was actually a lot of influent people who saw Hitler in a pretty positive way. So he has put this play. So this is Julius Caesar, and you can see that's a direct allusion to the Gestapo, the repression against Jew people that he has seen already, and he tried to mobilize the opinion already, American opinion, with this kind of thing, and yeah, it made some impression.
I'm not as politically engaged for two reasons. I'm as politically minded. I'm more interested in politics than in anything in the world, much more interested in politics than I am in movies or art or anything. I'm absolutely fascinated by politics and have been all my life. I was deeply engaged in politics at a time when I had a chance to be engaged, when Roosevelt was president and when the world was open to young people to enter the world of politics.
So after the first successes in theater, he had a contract with CBS radio in 1937, and he had a weekly show, 1 hour weekly, so that there was a full season. He made there was stories, so plays on radio for 1 hour, for example, of Dracula, the Treasure Island, The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, and the 39 Steps, for example, which was adapted at the same time on screen by Alfred Hitchcock. But his period with the radio is mostly known for another event. And I just picked, if you want, like we can do some radio listening for a few, maybe two minutes, what it looked like, what it sounded like.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars.
What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission. However, we will return.
2X2L calling CQ, New York. Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone? 2X2L.
As I set down these notes on paper, I'm obsessed by the thought that I may be the last living man on Earth. I've been hiding in this empty house near Grover's Mill, a small island of daylight cut off by the black smoke from the rest of the world. All that happened before the arrival of these monstrous creatures in the world now seems part of another life. A life that has no continuity with the present.
So this adaptation of the War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Wells is nothing to related. H.G. Wells is written without an E. It was strange, like it's available online if you want to find the whole episode. It's just 1 hour. It's very interesting. It's really mentioned very clearly at the beginning of the show. This is an adaptation of the H.G. Wells, The War of the World, by the Mercury Theatre. But still, looks like it created so much panic because they played so well with these fake technical interruptions and the use of the media. Basically, what I want to say is that it's very interesting how he shifted from the theater, which is extremely direct and visual, to the radio, which is purely an audio media, and then he kind of reinvented or invented a lot of use for this media, and with actually a purpose. He explains a bit.
Were you aware of terror at the time you were giving this role? Were you aware that terror was going on throughout the nation?
Oh, no, of course not.
So this was an interview just the day after the broadcast. It created, you've seen all the newspaper clips. By the way, one of the newspaper clips is called Inquirer. It belonged to a magnate called William Randolph Hearst. We'll talk about him soon afterward. So here he played really the innocent guy, like, oh no, I'm sorry if we created a lot of panic. Of course, it was really his intention, I believe. And he explains it a bit later on.
And a lot of people wanted to know what to do. As a matter of fact, they were phoning us from all over the place. Some of them reporting that they'd seen Martians landing in their backyards and asking for advice. And there were others that claimed to have been attacked personally by Martians. The whole experience was extremely intense. I suppose we had it coming to us because, in fact, we weren't as innocent as we meant to be. When we did the Martian broadcast, we were fed up with the way in which everything that came over this new magic box, the radio, was being swallowed. people, you know, do suspect what they read in the newspapers and what people tell them, but when the radio came, and I suppose now television, anything that came through that new machine was believed. So in a way, our broadcast was an assault on the credibility of that machine. We wanted people to understand that they shouldn't take any opinion predigested, and they shouldn't swallow everything that came through the tap, whether it was radio or not.
And then, of course, they passed a lot of laws. Now you can't do it. You can't give a news broadcast, say this is the news without all that. But the people who tried it in other countries were all put in jail. And I got a contract.
Yeah, so it created a lot of attraction on him. Probably that was also the intention. Like, he was definitely a brilliant young man and also an ambitious one, I believe. So he got a contract, and he got a contract in Hollywood with the RKO Studios. He explained also that the contract was unique in the history of cinema at that time, and it's still pretty unique what he could get, because at the beginning he was really passionate at that time about theater, but he wasn't that very interested in cinema. So what he wanted, so he got a bit of money with that contract, of course, with RKO, but what he wanted was the uniqueness of it was an absolute control, an absolute creative control. And for the studios, they were very eager to get someone like him with already, he was 25 only, but a very strong aura, and somebody who can really make the news. And a very strong creator, an artist. And the studio, RKO Studio, which was one of the 5 major of that time in Hollywood, they were very happy to get him and get his contract. It was a contract to make 2 movies. He proposed them first an adaptation of a book by Joseph Conrad, and another project was a thriller, a spy kind of story. It didn't quite work. After something like 8 months in Hollywood, nothing came really out. He brought with him in Hollywood most of the people of the Mercury Theater production, so from New York. They had probably a lot of good time there, drinking a lot, having a lot of parties, but nothing really came out. And that's when he met the script writer, Herman Mankiewicz. Herman Mankiewicz, it's not the Mankiewicz, Joseph Mankiewicz, the director, nothing to do with that, but Herman Mankiewicz was a well-known scriptwriter at the time, a bit not really, he was towards the end of his career, and he had the idea, so he knew a lot about Hollywood, and especially about the politics behind Hollywood. So that very young ambitious man, Orson Welles, really embraced the idea, and came one of the masterpieces of the history of cinema that it's really unique. That's Citizen Kane. Just the beginning, a famous shot. This shot was shows a lot of things. There are so many things to say about Citizen Kane. It would deserve lots of studies and all. That's not. I'm not going to do that now. I cannot. But here you can see one of the strong influence graphically, which is expressionism. The strong lighting, the use of weird angles, wide shots, the very wide depths of field and so on and so forth that he picked mostly from the German cinema from the 20s and the 30s. And it was very well adapted to a topic like Citizen Kane. I'll let him speak a little bit about it before.
There was indeed a very definite effort to stop the film during shooting by those elements in the studio who were attempting to seize power, because in those days, studio politics, particularly RKO and indeed many of the big studios in Hollywood, were very much like Central American republics. And there were revolutions and counter-revolutions and every sort of palace intrigue, and there was a big effort to overthrow the then head of the studio, who was taken to be out of his mind because he'd given me this contract, which made the making of these films possible. And stopping me or proving my incompetence would have won their case. Mr. Hearst was quite a bit like Kane, although Kane isn't really founded on Hearst in particular. There are many people sat for it, so to speak. But he was like Kane in that he wouldn't have stooped to such a thing. But he had many hatchet men, editors and representatives of this great network of newspapers all over the country. And to get in good with the chief, there was a good deal of very strong hatchet, including an effort to frame me on a criminal charge, which a policeman was good enough to tell me about. It's sensational and silly and dangerous and gangsterish as that.
Okay, I missed a bit the first explanation about Citizen Kane before showing you this clip. So the main idea of Citizen Kane is a kind of biography, mostly about this character, which was extremely powerful. He was William Hearst. So at that time, Hearst owned a lot of newspapers all around the country. They said that probably 30 or 40% of Americans read a Hearst newspaper every day. And so he started his career as newspaperman in the late 19th century. So by that time, in the late 30s, he was pretty old, but he was an extremely powerful person. He had really a kind of empire, you can say, and not based of any kind of decent journalism, I would say. Like, in some way, like he's one of the precursors of what you can say the trash journalism. He was, as Orson Welles explained a little bit, because after, we'll just get back to that right after, but Kane was not a piece of cake to realize and afterwards to put out and be accepted by the studio and the distributors. So just for example, like in the early 20th century, Mr. Hearst started to, so he bought a lot of newspapers, he had so much money, which is really depicted very well in the film, in Citizen Kane. And I think Orson Welles really pinpoint very important traits of this character. Early 20th century even called, or his newspapers, Mr. Hearst newspapers, called for the assassination of the President of the United States. That was President McKinley. And believe it or not, a few months later, McKinley was assassinated with a bullet. But Hearst was not, didn't matter for him, just continued. For example, also he became as a leftist Hearst, talking about Hearst. He's a populist, a leftist, like criticizing a lot of policies by the government, and little by little, like he moved to the right, the populist right, including some support of the Nazis again. And then he was a complete megalomaniac guy. It was said that at some point in the 20s, he accounted for himself only something like 20% of the worldwide art market. a lot of paintings, he acquired a lot of paintings, sculptures and all, because Hearst had amazing property, dozens of square kilometers right between Los Angeles and San Francisco. And so he built a hill, and he built a castle on the top of that hill. That was really the model in Citizen Kane, if you remember the movie, Xanadu. So actually there's a lot of very personal things about Hearst in Kane. There's always, by the way, the Hearst empire still exists, like it's a $12 billion revenue per year, and they still own a lot of papers. But it was, I think, a network. So the Enquirer, so you had the Chicago Enquirer, the Los Angeles Enquirer. Nowadays, I think that newspapers like Vogue or Harper's, yes, probably, yeah. So it's really an empire, a press empire, which still exists. So when this young fellow Orson Welles reached the Arco studio, they started shooting this movie about against, you can say, really against one of the most powerful country in the country and in the world. So that's why he explained that in that clip, that actually there were a lot of pressure to prevent the release of Citizen Kane. This next interview is by the editor of Citizen Kane, who was Robert Wise. Probably you heard that name already. Robert Wise became a director afterwards. For example, like the day the Earth stood still, West Side Story, very well known, or the first Star Trek movie.
I got a call from my boss one Monday morning saying, listen, there's a great urgency that you go to New York with this print of Kane because they need it back in New York very, very urgently. He was going to get on a plane and go. I was told I was to take the print of the picture to the music hall where they had a projection theater there. Now these were the chairman of the boards, head men of all the major studios, and their lawyers. The purpose of it was to see, after looking at the picture, whether the companies would say to RKO, in the interest of our film industry, put this film on the shelf, don't release it. That was the first time I realized the film was really in danger. Orson was there. Orson knew what was up. It wasn't that he was there just by accident. He knew that this was a very crucial point.
There's a question somehow around Citizen Kane. A lot of people have seen similarities between Kane, so which takes so much of this character, William Randolph Hearst. But some people saw a kind of autobiography, or even afterwards, autobiography of Orson Welles, probably in the monumental size of this, of his career, of his ambitions, somehow artistic ambitions. I had this impression, but I have to say that after reading a lot of things, and Orson Welles himself said, like, no, there's nothing of me in that character, Kane, and I would tend to believe that more. Except that he made sure, Orson Welles, in the character of Kane, that he made really a strong critic, but also he put a lot of humanity somehow. Citizen Kane is somehow a story of a lost childhood, about ambitions, about the, of course, the control by the media, the influence of media in society, and also the power of money and crazy ambitions of the influence that this money and power can have on people like that, like Hearst. So I think it's more the humanity side, like he has put in Citizen Kane, which came from him, from his own experience. And probably the main difference between Hearst's life and Citizen Kane is that he has put the character of Charles Foster Kane as orphan. And he himself, Orson Welles, was, as I said, like had lost his parents very soon, which was not at all the case from Hearst. There's just an interesting clip, I believe, where Orson Welles, who plays, of course, he directs, he has scripted, he has directed, he has put a lot of technical, he has learned a lot technically, like you will see, and he plays in it. So what a crazy, ambitious project for someone who did not make one single movie and first was not really interested in making movies. He explained he became passionate about cinema when he was there in Hollywood making the movie, but when he started, it was just an experiment, just a job for him. Here, that's the first picture that you can really see the person, the character of Kane. So.
Millions of Spain off Jersey coast. Is that really your idea of how to run a newspaper?
I don't know how to run a newspaper, Mr. Thatcher. I just try everything I can think of.
Charles, you know perfectly well there's not the slightest proof that this armada's off the Jersey
Hello,
coast.
Mr. Bernstein.
Excuse me, Mr.
Can you
Kane.
prove it isn't?
This just
Mr.
came
Bernstein,
in.
I'd like you to meet Mr. Thatcher.
I'll just borrow How do you do, Mr. Thatcher?
Leland,
Hello.
Mr. Thatcher, my ex-guardian.
From
We have
Cuba.
no secrets from our readers, Mr. Bernstein. Mr. Thatcher is one of our most devoted readers. He knows what's wrong with every copy of the Inquirer since I took over. Read the cable.
Girls delightful in Cuba, stop. Could send you prose poems about scenery, but don't feel right spending your money. Stop. There is no war in Cuba. Signed, Wheeler. Any answer?
Yes, dear Wheeler, you provide the prose poems. I'll provide the war.
Okay, this line is you provide the prose and I provide the war. Actually, it's inspired by a real event. There was indeed a war between U.S. or a lot of military tensions between U.S. and Cuba at that time in the 30s. Probably I'm not sure about the dates about that. Sorry, don't take my word for it. But it existed, and Hearst indeed. For making the news and for the patriotic line that he wanted for his newspaper, for the populist side of it, he wanted to make headlines about a war in Cuba. And he wanted to help the American government to go to war to Cuba. And when the American government of that time refused, he himself bought a boat with, and he bought cannons and guns and sent people so that his reporters could report that there was a war in Cuba that really happened, and that's the kind of line that Orson Welles pinpointed. Of course, Hearst, who was in late 60s at this time, didn't really appreciate it to be shown like this in movie.
I must admit that it was intended consciously as a sort of social document, as an attack on the acquisitive society, and indeed on acquisition in general.
On the these crazy stories about Citizen Kane, like the MGM offered almost $1 million to RKO just to buy the negatives and destroy them. And the FBI, under the pressure from Hearst and his gang, basically opened a procedure against Orson Welles. He was 25 years old, and opened a procedure for communism. It has nothing to do with that. Or they set up traps for him to try to catch him with a minor girl in bed. Hopefully he had some indication, he explained that he had some indication from the police that he had to be careful. So that was really the kind of environment he stepped in, and he stepped right back, as if he targeted the most difficult and the biggest target he could ever imagine. And again, like he was branded as a genius coming from New York, but absolutely zero experience with Hollywood. And so this is Peter Bogdanovich. Peter Bogdanovich was, he died a few months ago, unfortunately. He's a well-known director of the 70s. And he became really a very good friend with Orson Welles, and he was one of his biographers.
That was Orson. You know, that was a good example of Orson's personality. He liked to be challenged with you know, impossible odds. He pushed it a bit far on that one, and he got burned quite a lot.
Yeah, he got burned quite a lot. That we'll see later on. I mean, he won somehow. So basically, during that meeting with the studios, he threatened them to go public and speak about the freedom of speech in the US. So finally, he got his movie released. Unsurprisingly, the movie got a lot of bad press from who you can guess. But he won half an Oscar, as he said, for the screenplay shared with Mankiewicz, the other screenplay. And the movie was really recognized a few years later as such an important movie in the history of cinema. Here, I'll just open a little bit some technical parentheses, what makes this movie and the style of Orson Welles so unique. That's the first thing is that the use of different shots and the long shots. This is 3 minutes, 4 minutes. It's not in length, but just to show a little bit what the ability. Another thing is called deep focus. So deep focus is just an optical thing. It's the opposite of shallow focus. He will explain a little bit more, but the deep focus means basically that you have everything from the background to the foreground in focus. So whereas in a lot of what we can call usually the cinematographic look, let's say, it's a look which is there's a technical implication with that, but it's let's say you have, when you see shoot a portrait or a dialogue, usually in cinema you have the focus from the eye to the ear, which is perfectly in focus, and usually the background is pretty blur, and the foreground also. So that's just a technique, basically, to help the audience focus on what is important, the use of the depth of field. And here, when you choose deep focus, you don't have this easy trick somehow, because everything would be perfectly sharp in the picture. So that's why you can develop, that's the mise en scène, as we say, how to compose, the composition of the picture and the movement of the camera, the movement of the character, of the different elements and all, and how to attract the attention of the viewers to the different things at different time in the shot. So if you don't mind, we can watch a bit, like one minute of this one. That's really the childhood of Charles Foster Kane. That's the child Foster Kane, and how he was taken away from his parents.
Be careful, Charles.
Kane.
Pull your muffler around your neck, Charles.
Kane, I think we shall have to tell him now.
Yes. I'll sign those papers now, Mr. Thatcher.
You people seem to forget that I'm the boy's father.
It's going to be done exactly the way I've told Mr. Thatcher.
There ain't nothing wrong with Colorado. I don't see why we can't raise our own son just because we come into some money. If I want, I can go to court. A father has a right to. A boarder that beats his bill and leaves worthless stock behind. That property is just as much my property as anybody's, now that it's valuable, And if Fred Graves had any idea all this was going to happen, he'd have made out those certificates in both our names.
However, they were made out in Mrs. Kane's name.
He owed the money for the board to the both of us.
The bank's decision on all matters
I
concerning...
don't hold with signing my boy away to any bank as
I
guardian.
want you to
just
stop
because...
all this nonsense,
The bank's
Jim.
decision on all matters concerning his education, his places of residence, and similar subjects is to be
The
final.
idea of a bank being the
I
guardian.
want you to stop all this nonsense, Jim.
We will assume full management of the Colorado load, of which I repeat, Mrs. Kane, you are the sole owner.
Where do I sign, Mr. Thatcher?
Right here, Mrs. Kane.
Mary, I'm asking you for the last time. Anybody'd think I hadn't been a good
The
husband,
sum of
a father.
$50,000 a year is to be paid to you and Mr. Kane as long as you both live, and thereafter to the survivor.
Well, let's hope it's all for the best.
It is.
Okay, here you can see the camera starting almost from outside. Trolley shot pulling back the camera. Then characters appearing, so that you have, and in the back, so that what I was saying, that the focus is sharp from the foreground to the background. There's no trick in that, and Orson Welles wanted the people to see as much as possible, basically, rather than put in another way, like what's the use of having multi-million budget for making beautiful decors if anyway they are all blurred, so. But also he developed different tricks, different, how do you say, special effects. So one of them was to use to shoot to make one shot and then project it on a screen, on a white screen, while you shoot the other one. So that's pretty much, and that's a way to keep, because from an optical point of view, you just cannot have, especially in low light, cannot have everything sharp. Like there's some physics in there. So that you sometimes like split screen also, like they cut actually the screen in two, and taking two shots and gluing them together, so that basically one person on one side is on the foreground, the other person would be in the background, and should put that all together, everything is in focus. There's also a small trick here, just like it's pretty well known, like you can find it, I didn't discover it, but during just to tell you, he used, for example, like, during the back of the camera, actually here you can see there's a table in between. So actually the table was made in two parts, and it was cut so that the camera could actually go back, and as soon as the camera passes by, you have the team which assembles the table as if it was there. A lot of tricks like that, which are you can see if you really see, like, okay, it doesn't matter, but the hat actually slightly moving in the movie. It doesn't matter too much, like it's.
Zoom background, not the trolley.
It is a trolley.
Is it your trolley?
Oh yes.
At this time there was no zoom about to do that?
There was zoom, but here it's clearly not a zoom. It's wide angle all the way. Maybe a bit of zoom, but there's definitely a camera. After this shot, like it goes, the camera without cut, like it lasts for 3-4 minutes and goes back again to the window, piling up with the conversation and giving some more clues about what the destiny of this child, basically. That is what in one single shot, they're just setting up the destiny of the one child. Like his mother signs basically the paper for adoption so that they sell him. So that's purely invention for the story.
26 years old, and you made Citizen Kane, and they said you can't do these things. You can't have the background in focus or whatever it was, or you can't shoot a scene that way, Mr. Wells, or young Mr. Wells, or Orson, or whatever they called you then. And you knew that you could. And how did you know this?
Because I didn't know any better, and it's very much in the line with what Jack was saying earlier in the show. It comes from just, sheer dumbness. You're sure it's got to be you're good and you're great. It's ignorance. There's no authority in the world like it.
But there's got to be something more than that technically. I mean, how did you know that...
You know technically that the whole bag of movies can be learned in about a day and a half. I kid you not.
Now, how does it work? How do you do it? You get a guy who knows how to...
And then ask him, and that's the end of it. It isn't much harder than taking home movies. It's just about 3 points harder.
Mm-hmm.
And all these guys who do it try to make a big mystery of it because that's their living.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the right to say it because I had in my first picture in Kane the greatest cameraman who ever lived, who was Greg Toland. And he came to my office and said, I want to work in your picture. My name is Toland. And I said, why do you, Mr. Toland? He said, because you've never made a picture. And you don't know what cannot be done.
Gee.
And so I said, but I really don't. Can you tell me? He says, there's nothing to it. And he gave me the day and a half lessons. And he was right.
Showed you how the camera works.
That's right. There's nothing to do. And so we had the day and a half, and there it was. But the only thing was, I'd been directing in the theater for years, and nowadays they have lighting people. We did then, and I had some of the greatest lighting people, in fact, in the theater, but many of the shows I lit myself, and I was supervised it, and I thought a director did that in a movie. So for the first 10 days, I was moving the lights around, you see. And Toland was behind me, fixing it up and changing the readings and saying, shut up, let him go on. I want to see what he's up to.
So Greg Toland was indeed famous DOP, a famous cameraman. And just before he worked, Toland, he worked with on The Grapes of Wrath with John Ford, where he experimented, so 1940, just 1 year before Citizen Kane. And he indeed experimented with new techniques with John Ford. And especially that the deep focus thing. And if you see The Grapes of Wrath, it's with Henry Fonda. It's a great movie also, very poignant story. And visually speaking, like you can also see that it's a different look. It looks much sharper, high contrast, which is partly due to this use of deep focus technique.
I'm about to make 2 more movies. And one will have no depth of field whatever, and because it's a very romantic story, and depth of field is the enemy of romance. It is. And the other is a modern story about an American political candidate, and it'll have as much depth of field as we can get.
Yeah, just so that he explained, like here, like this was shot in the 80s. A few years before his death. There are also interviews in the 50s and the 60s. Like he was a very popular, somehow popular, with a dark side in it, which I think I made it clear, which came a lot from his bit bad reputation as a difficult person, a difficult artist. Came a lot from the character assassination. We can say really it was extremely strong against him by the media and the Hearst Empire.
With respect to the said newspapers, the said Charles Foster Kane hereby relinquishes all control thereof, and of the syndicates pertaining thereto, and any and all other newspaper, press, and publishing properties of any kind whatsoever, and agrees to abandon all claim
Which
thereto.
means we're bust. All right.
Well, out of cash.
All right, Mr. Bernstein. I've read it, Mr. Thatcher. Let me sign it, and I'll go home.
Too old to call me Mr. Thatcher, Charles.
You're too old to be called anything else. You were always too old.
Okay, this clip, I just put it there, like, okay, in the story that depicts the start of the fall of Hearst. So that was during the crisis of 1929, where he didn't realize that this whole world basically was collapsing, his whole business world, so that he continued making crazy expenses for his castle thing and his project. So that's where this scene comes in Citizen Kane. But the composition, I think this very short clip, it's almost static shot, but you can see how he used different layers. Like first the paper where you can read, then one character talking, you don't see the other character, then a second character appears, the start of a conversation. They have a small conversation, things are going bad, and then appears a third character, Kane, or Orson Welles. First, like, he starts big, and then as he walks, that's the use of wide angle, as he walks a little bit more in the room, actually he becomes a very small character, and the space of the room is like it's as if what he has built, his office, basically suddenly became too big for this, and that man, very powerful, very rich man, actually he can be very small when he starts losing his money. So, and the whole attention of our eye when we see that, it really flows naturally from the text to the small dialogue to people, and then the third person, the main character of the movie, steps in, and the importance of the volume and all. So I think that's what you can call a brilliant mise en scène. I think I have another clip just to show the importance of the expressionism in that movie, which is not absolute. Like, it's in some shots you have it, which is very, very striking. For example, this one, which is coming.
I bring him right in.
All I want
Under
to know
no
is...
circumstances are direct quotations from his manuscript to be used by you.
Well, that's
Can
all
we
right.
come in?
I'm just looking for one.
Jennings? Thank you, Jennings. Mr. Thompson, you will be required to leave this room at 4:30 promptly. You will confine yourself, it is our understanding, to the chapters in Mr. Thatcher's manuscript regarding Mr. Kane.
That's all I'm interested in. Thank you.
Pages 83 to 142.
So there is, of course, the composition, again, the camera movement. The lighting is very spectacular in that scene. So that's something really, which I think, which is inherited from the expressionism, and especially the German movie like Murnau or Fritz Lang. There's also something else in that short scene which is striking, I believe. Yes, the sound design. The sound design, the doors, the sinister ambience of this scene is also very much put in emphasis with the sound. And I think that's really his experience with radio, which brought that to him. So it's kind of impressive how he was, as I said, like he was a musician, a painter, a theater man, and a radio man, and then all together, like he came almost naturally in making movies.